Hello everyone, and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we're going to dive into a story about betrayal, pain, and how one man struggles to overcome his past to rebuild a new life. This story will take you through an unexpected journey. These surprises not only add to the intensity of the narrative but also highlight themes of love, betrayal, obsession, and the difficult path of letting go to move forward. If you find this story intriguing and full of valuable lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content. If there were an award for the most painful and ruthless way to discover your spouse's betrayal, I wouldn't just win it, I'd probably be etched into the Hall of Fame of tragedies. It's not a title anyone would wish for, but bitterly, I was handed it without any right to refuse. Like many others in this situation, I was suddenly thrust into a dark club, one that no one ever wants to join. No invitations, no warnings, just a brutal truth crashing down, shattering everything I had ever believed in. I used to think stories like this only happened in movies or viral posts online. But now, it was unfolding right before my eyes, and I was the main character in this tragic tale. I will never forget the sound of my ex-wife's sister's voice on the phone that day, shaky, choked up, and filled with fear. She kept repeating the same phrase like a desperate plea. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Her voice trembled, as if she was trying to calm herself down but failing. I frowned, a sense of unease creeping into my chest. Why was she apologizing? "What's going on?" I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion after a long week of business trips. But there was no immediate response, only the sound of her ragged breathing on the other end. I felt my grip tighten around the steering wheel. My heart started pounding, an invisible anxiety slithering up my spine. Your wife is in the hospital," she finally blurted out, her voice breaking. "You need to come home. Now." The air in the car suddenly felt suffocating. My eyes widened, my mind going blank. "The hospital? What happened to her?" I asked urgently, trying to keep my composure. But the answer I received only made my panic worse. It was an assault. A punch of pure shock landed straight into my gut. "Assault?" I repeated, as if the word was too foreign to be associated with my wife. "I can't say more. You just need to come home now." And with that, she hung up. I yelled her name, tried calling back, but all I got was the soulless beep, beep, beep of a disconnected line. A wave of helplessness wrapped around me like a venomous snake. A million questions flooded my mind. Who had hurt her? Was she okay? Why was her sister so terrified? I couldn't understand anything. But there was one thing I knew for sure, I needed to get home immediately. My foot slammed down on the gas pedal. Streetlights blurred past me like ghosts as I sped through the night, each heartbeat pounding like a ticking bomb inside my chest. Hello everyone, and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we will listen to a story about betrayal, pain, and how a man struggles to overcome his past to build a new life. Today's story will take you through an unexpected situation. These surprises not only make the story more dramatic but also highlight themes of love, betrayal, obsession, and the journey of letting go of the past to move forward. If you find this story interesting and full of valuable lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful insights. If there were an award for the most ruthless and painful way to discover a partner's betrayal, I wouldn't just win it, I'd be engraved on the golden plaque of tragedy. It's not a title anyone desires, but cruelly, it was handed to me without the option to refuse. Like many in this situation, I was suddenly thrust into a dark club, a place no one ever wishes to be a member of. No invitation, no warning, just a brutal truth crashing down, shattering everything I once believed in. I used to think stories like this only happened in movies or viral posts online, but now, it was unfolding right before my eyes, and I was the main character in this tragedy. I will never forget the trembling, tear-choked, fear-filled voice of my ex-wife's sister on the phone that day. She kept repeating the same desperate plea. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Her voice shook as if she was trying to calm herself down but failing miserably. My brows furrowed, and unease crept into my chest. Why was she apologizing? What's happening? I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion after a long business trip. But there was no immediate answer, just the sound of rapid, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. My heart began to race, an invisible dread slithering down my spine. Your wife. Your wife is in the hospital, she finally blurted out, her voice broken. You need to come back immediately. The air inside the car suddenly felt suffocating. My eyes widened, my mind blanking out. Hospital? What happened to her? I asked urgently, trying to keep my composure. But the response I received only heightened my fear. It was an assault. An invisible punch slammed into my gut. Assault? I repeated, as if the word was too foreign to associate with my wife. I can't say more, you need to come back now. And then, she hung up. I shouted her name, trying to call back, but all I got was the cold, lifeless beeping of a disconnected call. A crushing sense of despair coiled around me like a venomous snake. A flood of questions crashed into my mind. Who hurt her? Was she okay? Why was her sister so panicked? I couldn't understand what was happening. But I knew one thing for sure, I had to get home immediately. My foot pressed hard against the gas pedal. The streetlights blurred past like ghostly streaks as I sped through the night, my heartbeat pounding like a ticking bomb in my chest. My ex-wife and I met on a summer evening when we were both in our 20s, carefree, passionate, yet still so naive about life. That night, I attended a barbecue party hosted by a mutual friend. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of grilled meat blending with the smoky breeze under the night sky. Strings of golden fairy lights flickered above the patio, reflecting off clinking beer glasses. Amidst the lively crowd, my eyes accidentally locked onto a stranger's gaze. She stood in a quiet corner, holding a glass of juice, her long hair cascading softly over her shoulders. There was something about her that drew me in instantly, perhaps the contrast between her delicate beauty and the hint of shyness in her eyes. While everyone else chatted and laughed freely, she seemed to retreat into herself, like a quiet note in a loud, exuberant melody. I walked over, trying to start a conversation. At first, she only responded with small smiles and short answers, but her eyes glimmered with curiosity. Maybe she was observing me too, wondering who I was and why I was so interested in her. We talked for a long time, and the more we spoke, the more captivated I became. She wasn't just beautiful, she was intelligent, thoughtful. The way she listened, the way she carefully chose her words before speaking, the sincerity in her voice, all of it made me feel like this wasn't just a random encounter, but something much more. We didn't rush into a relationship. She made me wait, but that wait only made everything feel more special. When we finally became official, I felt like I had found something truly precious. That night, the first time we tried to be intimate, everything felt so natural, so tender, until she suddenly broke down in tears. Not just a few silent tears, but deep, wrenching sobs, her body trembling as if caught in a storm of emotions. I was stunned, feeling as if I had touched a wound I never knew existed. I stopped immediately, not knowing what to do other than stare at her in confusion. She curled up, hugging her knees, struggling to breathe between ragged sobs. I'm sorry. Her voice broke between hiccups. It's not you. It's me. I sat there, speechless, gently pulling the blanket over her. A part of me feared that I had done something wrong, but deep down, I knew this wasn't about me. This was about something that had scarred her long before I entered her life. The next morning, she sent me a long text message apologizing. The sentences were fragmented, as if she had hesitated for hours before writing them down. 2 years before I met you. I loved someone. Someone I thought would be with me forever. I held my breath as I read on. He didn't just hurt me physically. He made me afraid of myself. He made me believe I wasn't worthy of love, that whenever I resisted, I deserved to be punished. Every time he hurt me, he'd say he loved me, that he couldn't live without me. I stared at the words, feeling my chest tighten. Now, I understood. The trembling, the tears, the sudden fear, it all traced back to him. I clenched my phone, feeling a mix of sorrow and rage. Not at her, but at the man who had broken her this way. At that moment, I realized, I didn't just love her. I wanted to protect her from the ghosts of her past. He didn't just hurt me physically, but with his words. She had once told me that, whispering as if even the air around us could betray her. I didn't ask too many questions, but from the scattered fragments of her past, I could piece the story together. He didn't just beat her, he tore her down bit by bit with cruel words in her weakest moments. No one else will ever love you. You're just a useless doll. You're lucky to have me. The words he whispered after every act of violence weren't words of love but invisible chains binding her. And then, the next morning, he'd kneel, tears streaming down his face, saying he loved her, that he regretted it, that he couldn't live without her. An endless cycle. A trap she never realized she had fallen into. We moved into a new house, a place with no traces of painful memories, a place that belonged only to us. Our very first home. I bought it with an inheritance from my late uncle, and though it wasn't extravagant, it had a small garden, just enough for us to start a new life together. One afternoon, as we strolled through the garden, I jokingly said, "How about we plant a peach tree? To mark a new beginning?" I didn't think she would take it seriously, but her eyes lit up like a child's. "I love that idea," she said, smiling, a real smile, free from the burdens of the past. And so, we planted a peach tree right in front of our house, as a symbol of love, hope, and rebirth. We believed it would grow alongside our happiness. But what I didn't know was that, years later, beneath that very tree, I would propose to another woman. We got married not long after, and to be honest, it was the happiest time of my life. Of course, like any married couple, we had our disagreements, arguments over who should do the dishes, my occasional habit of leaving the toothpaste cap off, or how she loved playing music too loudly while cooking. But I always felt luckier than most because she never let these small things create cracks in our marriage. She had a principle: never go to bed angry. If something upset her, she wouldn't stay silent or let it build into resentment. She would gently bring it up, not in an accusatory way, but simply to help me understand. I remember once, I forgot our anniversary, and when I realized it, I braced myself for an argument. But instead of being angry, she simply smiled, sat down beside me, and said, "Today is special, but I don't want it to be a sad day. Can we do something together to make up for it?" And so, that night, we cooked a simple dinner, watched her favorite movie, and spent the entire evening just being together. Moments like those made me feel that no matter what happened in the world, I always had a place to come home to. I once believed our love was unshakable. That if someone asked me for the secret to a happy marriage, I would say it lay in understanding, sincerity, and having a partner who knows how to soothe you even when you make mistakes. But what I didn't know was that love, no matter how beautiful, can crack in ways no one ever expects. Sometime later, life changed. I got promoted. That meant a higher salary, a more stable career, and what seemed like a promising future. But along with that came long business trips, late-night meetings, and nights when I couldn't come home to sleep beside my wife. At first, she still smiled, still hugged me tightly whenever I returned from a trip. But gradually, I noticed something had changed. Her smile no longer shone as brightly as before. Our conversations became shorter, duller. She used to wait for me to have dinner together, telling me about her day, about little things that kept us connected as a couple. But now, when I got home, I would only see the bedroom light turned off, and she would already be lying in bed, facing away from me. The intimacy between us also faded. The spontaneous hugs, the good morning kisses, they slowly disappeared. She no longer rested her head on my shoulder while watching movies, no longer reached for my hand in the crowd. I convinced myself that it was just the stress of work making her tired. But then, stranger things started happening. She always kept her phone close. Before, she used to leave it on the kitchen counter or the sofa, letting me pick it up if I needed to check something. But now, it was always in her hand, even when she went to the bathroom or to bed. When I got close, she would quickly lock the screen, sometimes even turning away. I found it odd, but I didn't want to become the kind of husband who was overly suspicious. What bothered me the most was that she no longer gently pointed things out like before. If I did something that upset her, she wouldn't say anything anymore. No more soft reminders, no more conversations to resolve misunderstandings. Just a silence that stretched between two people who once meant everything to each other. One night, when I tried to ask her what was wrong, she simply sighed and said, "I'm fine. It's just a phase." And I believed her. I thought that everyone goes through phases like this, that maybe I was just overthinking. And because I trusted her, I ignored all the signs that I should have paid attention to. Sometimes, she would stay overnight at her sister's house, saying she just needed some private time with her. I had no reason to doubt her. She had always been close to her family, and I wanted her to have her own space when needed. And the day I received that fateful call was also the day she said she would be staying with her sister. When my phone rang, I was still on my way home from the airport after a long business trip. My mind was exhausted, but my ex-sister-in-law's voice on the phone instantly jolted me awake. "You need to get to the hospital immediately." Her voice was trembling, urgent. I could hear her heavy breathing through the phone, as if she were panicking. Those words stabbed into my mind, making my heartbeat pound so hard it ached. What happened? "Is my wife okay?" I asked frantically, nearly shouting. "She was attacked. An assault. Please, hurry." Then she hung up. I tried calling back, but no one answered. A primal fear surged inside me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my eyes locked on the road ahead, my foot pressing the gas pedal harder than ever. Chaotic thoughts flooded my mind. Who hurt her? Why? Is she even alive? When I rushed into the hospital, my heart was pounding so violently it felt like it might burst. The hospital air was cold, the pungent smell of antiseptics making me nauseous. I frantically searched for the reception desk, nearly losing my patience as I asked about my wife. "Patient's name?" the nurse asked. It took me a second to catch my breath. Then I said her name, my voice hoarse. Before the nurse could answer, a deep voice sounded behind me. "Are you her husband?" I turned around and saw a police officer. His face was serious, but his eyes were filled with understanding. Perhaps he had witnessed situations like this too many times. "What happened? Where is she?" I bombarded him with questions. He motioned for me to sit down. I didn't want to sit. I wanted to know immediately. But something in his eyes made me understand that what I was about to hear would not be easy. "I'm a friend of your sister-in-law," he began, his voice low and steady. "I happened to be present when we received a call responding to a domestic violence case." I frowned. What did that have to do with my wife? When I arrived, I saw a man pinning a woman down, repeatedly punching her in the face. My chest tightened. I felt breathless, a cold fear running down my spine. The woman was screaming, trying to scratch him to break free. He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. Then he looked me straight in the eyes, and his next sentence shattered my entire world. "That woman was your wife. This couldn't be real." The thought echoed in my mind, over and over, like a desperate mantra. The police must have made a mistake. Or maybe they were talking about someone else. 1. This had nothing to do with my wife, we were married. I shook my head, trying to make sense of everything. Why domestic violence? That term was only used for romantic relationships. But my wife had no one else but me. We were married, we had built a life together. How could she be involved in something like this? 2. Everyone who knew my wife knew she wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't confrontational. Never. My wife was gentle, sensitive. She wouldn't even raise her voice at anyone. How could she possibly be in a physical fight, let alone with a man? This wasn't her. There had to be a mistake. I stared at the officer, searching for some other explanation, something that would make this all make sense. But he just stood there, waiting for me to accept reality. And that only made me more confused. He watched me closely, his gaze filled with meaning, as if weighing whether or not to reveal the full truth. After a long silence, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder, a gesture both reassuring and cautionary, before speaking slowly, clearly. You need to stay calm. Because the girlfriend who got beaten up was your wife. At that moment, my world collapsed. I blinked, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach, knocking the air out of my lungs. No. No way. I laughed, a reflex, not out of amusement, but because the words sounded so absurd. I waited for the officer to correct himself or tell me this was all just a misunderstanding. But he just looked at me, his eyes full of sympathy, yet unwavering. No. It couldn't be her. It couldn't be my wife. Dizziness washed over me, making me feel like I was slipping out of reality. My heart pounded erratically in my chest, my ears ringing with meaningless echoes. But somehow, even though I didn't want to believe it, even though I tried to deny it, deep down, I knew the officer wasn't lying. Somehow, I knew he was telling the truth. Then, a nurse gently touched my hand, signaling me to follow her into the hospital room. I walked forward on autopilot, my legs heavy as stone, my chest filled with a hollow, all-consuming fear. I didn't know what I was about to face, but deep inside, I had a terrible feeling it would haunt me forever. The door opened. What I saw left me speechless. To this day, I still can't find the words to describe that moment. She lay there, on that stark white hospital bed, looking so small and fragile. The face that had once been so radiant was now bruised and swollen. Her left eye was so swollen it was nearly shut, dark bruises spreading across one side of her face. A faint trickle of blood still marked a crack on her lip, trailing down to her chin. The room spun around me. My chest tightened. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. A doctor stepped in, his voice calm but serious, breaking the heavy silence. She has a minor jaw fracture, severe swelling around the left eye from blunt force trauma. Additionally, 3 ribs are broken. I heard the words, but I didn't truly comprehend them. The numbers, the medical diagnoses, they all felt like distant echoes, impossible to connect to the image of the woman lying on that hospital bed. This was my wife. She is the one I promised to protect. And yet, here she is, in this condition. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug deep into my palms, sending sharp pain up my arms. A tidal wave of emotions surged through me, anger, helplessness, shock. Who did this to her? And why? I felt like I was about to collapse. The doctor took a deep breath, as if debating whether to continue. But then he uttered the words that shattered my entire world. And she is pregnant. It felt like someone had punched me straight in the gut. The air in the room thickened. My pulse pounded in my ears like raging waves crashing against a cliff. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She is pregnant. I tried to piece my thoughts together, but everything felt like broken shards, impossible to fit back into place. How? When? Whose child? My hands trembled, partly from anger, partly from the fear of the answer I was about to hear. That was when I noticed a familiar figure standing in the corner of the room, her sister. Her entire body was stiff, her eyes red from crying. The moment I looked at her, she lowered her head, as if trying to escape my gaze. The fury inside me surged, but I took a deep breath. Tell me. What is going on? She bit her lip and glanced at the officer, the same one who had forced me to sit down earlier. He gave her a small nod, encouraging her. She took a shaky breath before she began speaking, each word cutting into me like shards of broken glass. 5 months ago, he reached out to my sister again. He? I didn't need anyone to clarify, I already knew who he was. Her ex. The man I thought was long gone. The man who had hurt her in ways I never wanted to remember. My fists clenched tighter. I had to use every ounce of restraint to stay calm, even though every word her sister spoke felt like salt being rubbed into an open wound. He said he was on a journey of redemption. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer disgust rising in my throat. A journey of redemption? I repeated, my voice hoarse with fury. Yes, he said he was trying to apologize to everyone he had hurt, to cleanse his karma. A wave of nausea hit me. Did anyone else hear how utterly ridiculous this was? At first, they only talked. She continued, but I barely wanted to listen anymore. But then he convinced my sister to meet him for coffee. He said he just wanted to prove that he had changed. A cold dread washed over me. I had heard enough. At first, they only talked. I swallowed dryly, a chill running down my spine. Then, over time, she started to believe that he had truly changed. I let out a bitter chuckle, one filled with more pain than humor. A man like him? Changing? I couldn't believe my wife had been foolish enough to fall for that. But before I could react, her sister continued, her voice hesitant, as if she knew the next words would tear me apart. Old feelings resurfaced. I shook my head. No, stop talking. And eventually, it turned into a romantic relationship. My chest tightened like a vice. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath. They got back together. That simple fact was so absurd that it almost felt laughable. I had spent years loving her, healing the wounds he had left behind, and she went back to the very person who had broken her. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails pierced my skin. My sister confided in me about it, she admitted. I opened my eyes and stared at her. And what did you say? My voice was cold. She didn't answer right away. Seeing her hesitation made me realize that something even worse was coming. I told her to let things happen naturally. In that moment, I thought I had misheard her. What? I told her to just let it play out, if necessary. I shot up from my chair, nearly knocking it over. What the hell are you saying? But she wasn't done. No, she was about to be even more ruthless. And when it became physical 3 months later, a sharp ringing filled my ears. No. No way. I told her that if she truly wanted to make peace with him, she should do whatever she felt was right. I felt the world spin around me. Not only that, my sister-in-law, someone I once considered family, had not just encouraged her but also helped her hide it. The nights my wife told me she was staying over at her sister's place. The times I texted her, but she didn't respond right away. The moments she avoided my questions when I tried to check in on her. Now, everything made sense. I let out a bitter laugh. So, I wasn't just betrayed by one woman, I was betrayed by two. By now, my sister-in-law was sobbing uncontrollably, apologizing over and over again. Her voice trembled, breaking between hiccups. I didn't know. I really didn't know about the past abuse. If I had known, I swear I never would have. But I wasn't listening anymore. Her apologies echoed in my ears like meaningless noise, like a distant voice speaking from too far away for me to make out the words. I just stood there, my mind completely blank. What was I supposed to say? Should I be angry? Should I scream at them, curse them? No. I felt nothing. No anger. No pain. No disappointment. Just emptiness. The only thing I knew, the cold, brutal truth, was that my wife had betrayed me. Not a moment of weakness. Not a fleeting mistake. But a calculated, deliberate betrayal that lasted for months. And now, I stood before her sister, listening to her late regrets, watching her tears that couldn't change anything. I took a deep breath. Is that so? My voice was dry, as if I were talking to a stranger. She looked up at me, her eyes swollen from crying. I couldn't read any emotion in them anymore. I'm really sorry. I didn't know. I nodded mechanically. All right. But nothing was all right. When my wife regained consciousness, I was there. She opened her eyes slowly, looking disoriented for a few seconds. Then her gaze met mine. Immediately, tears welled up in her eyes. You. Her voice was hoarse, weak. Then she broke down. Not quiet sobs, but shattered, desperate cries, like she had finally realized she had lost the most precious thing in her life. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching the woman I had once loved with all my heart, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. Watching her in pain. Watching her cry. And realizing I didn't love her anymore. She told me that, once, on the way home from his place, she had thought about driving her car into the river. I froze. What? I almost said it out loud, but she continued, her voice trembling. At that moment, I just wanted to escape that feeling. His scent was still on me, and I didn't want to bring that filth to you. I frowned. Filth? She nodded, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt disgusted. I betrayed you, I betrayed our marriage. But I couldn't stop. I was too weak, too stupid. And I thought. She swallowed hard, her trembling hands clutching the hospital blanket. If I disappeared, at least you would never have to find out. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. Not out of pity, but because I couldn't understand. She could have stopped. She had every chance to stop. But she didn't. What made you stop? My voice was dry. She shuddered, as if being dragged back from a distant memory. I found out I was pregnant. Silence. A terrifying, suffocating silence. She looked straight into my eyes, filled with regret. That's when I woke up. I realized that any contact with him was toxic, not just for me, but for the baby. She paused, then her voice turned desperate. So I decided to end everything. Directly. A chilling sensation crept up my spine. And that's when he attacked you? She nodded, bursting into tears. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. So that's why it ended. Not because she realized her mistake in time. Not because she was afraid of hurting me. But because she was pregnant. It wasn't her love for me that pulled her back. It was another life. I didn't know how to feel about that. After everything, she became a shadow of herself. She developed such an extreme fear of men that she couldn't be near anyone except me. There were nights when she wouldn't even dare go to the bathroom unless I held her hand. Heartbreaking, isn't it? After my son was born, we did a DNA test and confirmed that he was biologically mine. But the more time I spent with her, the more I realized that I didn't just hate her, I truly despised her. I no longer saw the woman I had married, only what remained after her disastrous affair. I decided to leave because I was afraid that one day, in a moment of rage, I would do something I'd regret and become an abuser like her ex-boyfriend. She begged me not to leave, even making outrageous offers like giving me a free pass to sleep with other women, or even saying that I could slap her if it would help me release my anger. At that moment, I knew I had to go. During the divorce process, she was very generous. She moved back in with her parents and signed a court-approved co-parenting agreement where everything was carefully planned out. 3 years later, I met my fiancée by chance. That day, I was at a bookstore with a friend, and we were discussing Egyptian mythology. A beautiful woman approached us and corrected my pronunciation of the Egyptian gods and cities. I was deeply impressed, not just by her knowledge, but also by the fact that she was actually Egyptian. We exchanged numbers and gradually started dating. When I proposed to her, I chose to do it right in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee to ask her, but before I could even hear her answer, she ran inside, only to come back with a ring. It turned out she had also been planning to propose to me because she loved me so much that she didn't want to risk losing me to anyone else. My son witnessed that moment, and in his adorable innocence, he told his mother everything. That night, my ex-wife showed up in the rain, screaming at me, demanding to know how I could propose to my fiancé right in front of our tree, then insisting that things between us weren't over yet. Right now, I'm completely exhausted. I can't go full and see, no contact, because she's my son's mother, but she's harassing both me and my fiancé. How can I convince her to let go of the past, overcome her fear of men, and stop forcing me to get a restraining order against her? Sorry for the long story, but I'm truly desperate. My marriage ended not only because of betrayal but also because of wounds that could never heal. Sometimes, even when we want to forgive, the scars run too deep to forget. I chose to walk away, not out of hatred, but because I understood that lingering pain could turn me into someone I never wanted to become. The biggest lesson I've learned is that love alone is not enough to sustain a relationship. It also requires respect, honesty, and responsibility. Once trust is lost, it cannot always be rebuilt. And more importantly, sometimes letting go is not giving up. It's the only way for both people to find true happiness. In any relationship, trust is the strongest foundation. Once broken, no matter how hard you try to mend it, the cracks remain. Don't let yourself be trapped in the past or bear the burden of healing someone else when you are wounded yourself. Learning to let go is not a sign of weakness but a reflection of growth and self-respect. True happiness doesn't come from holding on to someone who no longer deserves you, it comes from being open to a better future.